So if you've got questions about job search of any kind, industry, academia, doing a postdoc, looking at government, or anything that we consider non-traditional chemistry careers, our office is the place to help you. So today, specifically, we are going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about some things that you can do, again, no matter what type of a job search you're doing, to help you be successful. So I've got 10 steps specifically that I'm going to walk through with you today. So if you've got questions, you can put them on the Slido that was posted in the chat. Otherwise, you can also private chat me. I will try to either intersperse those as I'm talking or at the end. Or you can jump on, unmute yourself, and just ask in front of everybody. And we're a pretty small group today, so if you want to just jump in and ask a question, feel free to interrupt me at any point. That is not a problem either. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what those 10 steps are. The first one is actually probably the hardest, to be quite honest. The first thing that you really need to do is you need to figure out who you are, figure out what you want to do, and sort of where you're going. And the reason that I say that this is the first step is really because that will help you to, I mean, yes, you can apply to everything. So if you aren't sure if you want government or a postdoc or going into, like, you can apply to all those areas. It just means a lot more work for you. So the best thing to do before you even start the process is just sort of assess yourself. That would mean looking at things like your interests. What do you like to do? And that means both chemistry related, but also the non-chemistry things. So do you enjoy writing or speaking or working as a part of a team? Are you looking for something where you can be outside or inside? Do you love to be competitive? You know, all of those things can really shape what you're looking for in a career. You might not be able to meet every single interest. So if you really want to, if you love bench work, but you also love creating music, those two might not go together in a specific singular job, but it can still be part of like your vocation, the whole big picture. So what are your interests? That's one of the first things you want to do. And an activity that I'll do a lot of times with students who come in saying, I don't know what I want to do. So I just have them sort of brainstorm on paper, like write a bunch of things down. What are your interests? What are your abilities? What are you good at? Sometimes, especially when we're in a funk, that can be challenging to figure out. So I don't feel like I'm good at anything might be your response if I asked you that question. So ask your family, ask your friends, what do they say you're good at? It might be science related again, or it might be non-science related. All of that can still give us a clue. Then sort of start putting that into what's important to you. What are your short-term, what are your long-term career goals? And then from there, what is your brand? So this can encompass a lot of different things, but basically you're talking about, like, if you were to describe yourself, you're doing that conference, that elevator pitch at a conference, how would you tell somebody else who you are? Some of that might be strictly science, but what about the rest of it? What is something that you want other people when you meet them to know about you? Because this is such an important first step, I'm actually going to put you all into breakout rooms and have you just chat about this just for a couple of minutes. If it's something that you've never thought of and you have no idea and you just can't answer it, or you don't feel comfortable answering it in the breakout room, that's fine. You can just say, I have no idea. I've never thought about this, but I will because Patricia says I should. But if you've thought a little bit about who you are, your skills, your interests, what are you bringing to a potential employer, whether it's next year or whether it's 4 years down the road from now, and talk about that, just so that the other people in your group, in your little breakout group, can start thinking on their own about what that might look like for them. So I'm going to go ahead and break you into groups. Like I said, I'm just going to do a random sort. So when that breakout thing pops up, go ahead and accept that. And we'll just do this for about 5 minutes. But definitely introduce yourself. Tell everybody whose lab you're in, because not everybody might know, and your year. So those 3 pieces. And then what would you say is your brand? All right, so go ahead and accept that. I'm going to open all the rooms. All right, welcome back, everybody. So I'm curious to see if anybody had just like somebody in your room who had an amazing sort of here's who I am branding story. Anybody have a really good one? Maybe you do, or somebody else that was in your room.
I heard a very good one in my room. I think I don't know if he's comfortable saying it. So Mayank, I really liked yours.
Thank you, Yana. So I just said that I know a lot of things about a lot of topics, but I don't know everything about one particular topic. So I just said that my personal brand would be something like Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah, nice. Okay, good. All right, well, I won't call on anybody else, but thank you for being, both of you, being willing to share that information. So it's important to know who you are, obviously, before you even start the job situation, but it's also important to know what your stories are. So just to use your I'm the jack of all trades, like being able to tell that story is important. But in order to do that, you need to have specifics. Some of you may have heard us either through our office or heard it referred to as behavioral interviewing. So when you actually get to an interview, so I know I'm kind of skipping over the application documents for just a second, but when you get to the interview process, they want those specific stories. And it's also important, and the reason I have it here as opposed to later is you need to be able to have those stories that you would use in a behavioral interviewing situation. But when you're putting your documents together, you want to be sure that your brand is reflected, that if you are super great at some of the soft skills, maybe that's your greatest strength, you can't really put on your resume like, oh, I'm great at writing. Everybody can say that. You need to have some specifics to prove it to me as a recruiter. So have you published 20 papers? You know, I'm going to probably assume you're good at writing. Or maybe you collaborated on a grant that netted, you know, a certain amount of money. So that should be a bullet. If you are wanting to focus on that part of your story, then that's what your resume needs to reflect. I think a lot of times we get sort of stuck in this whatever that I just list everything I've done. In my research section, my bullets under my research need to just be about the research. And in some situations that is the case, but it really depends on what you're trying to sell, what you decide your brand should look like. And that is what your bullet should be. Yes, of course, you still have to explain that this is my research, but then the rest of your bullets should really reflect that brand message, those strengths that you're trying to get across. And then back to the behavioral interviewing. If you have these stories, specific things prepared, you can actually input those into your cover letter, which makes it a lot easier to write a cover letter because most of us don't like doing that. So you've probably heard of the STAR method. Patricia's version is the STAR method. SAR is all you really need. Generally, it stands for the situation. The T would stand for the task, but typically students are including the task when they're including the situation. So I'm trying to make it as less complicated as possible. So action, situation, specific story, action steps that you took in that story, and your results. And results are huge. So a lot of grad students tend to forget the results piece because you're always, like if you think about the research process, you kind of are always doing research. And yes, you write papers, but really the story isn't ever completely like, okay, we're done. We found everything else that we can never find out about this topic and we're gonna, you know, be done. It never happens. So I think because of that sort of way of thinking, it's hard in an interview situation to come up with that result piece, but it's probably one of the most crucial. So situation, action, results, and then you can use those stories, like I said, certainly for the interview, but also to create your documents. So your resume, whether you're looking at an industry position, it would be a resume. So typically for grad students, that means 2 pages. For everything else, it's going to be a CV. So that would be if you're applying for an academic position, a government position, whether it's a government lab or an agency or anything internationally, they're going to call those CVs. Basically, the only difference is like the only sort of concrete difference is the length. Resume for industry, for traditional like company jobs is always going to be 2 pages. Some companies even say 1 page, even at the PhD level, but the vast majority are okay with 2 pages. So that's usually advice we give out to grad students. For a CV, which again would be academic government, as long as you want. but all the other rules are the same. So consistency, making sure that you're highlighting that brand and those pieces of information that you're really wanting to sell. Cover letter is another document. Sometimes you will be required to put together your cover letter and submit it. Sometimes you have the option. If you ever have the option, do it. It's kind of like doing that extra homework that, I don't really want to do it, but it helps not only get you a better grade, but it helps the professor know, oh, look, this person's doing extra work. So the cover letter is something that's important to include if you can whatsoever. The cover letter is so different from your resume or your CV in that the cover letter is more story based. So again, going back to those stories that you've kind of been thinking about in your brand and so forth. The other thing that's important to include in the cover letter is a little bit about your passion and why you're interested in that particular employer. So why that school versus the 10 other schools in the state, or why that company versus the 15 other pharmaceutical companies that are out there. So what can you target and highlight specifically about that employer? In most cases, you will also need a research summary, which is generally a 2 to 3 page document. Just pull it from your papers. Pictures, charts, graphs, all that stuff is fine. It doesn't have to be 100% text. In fact, it probably shouldn't be. But generally 2 to 3 pages is your sort of your max. If you are looking at academic positions, you will also need an educational philosophy in many cases, or you might need something like an anticipated sort of lab needs or lab budget. You may also need a course statement, which would be sort of what you teach, what classes would you develop. So a few more extra documents if you're looking at an academic position. One thing that we've seen that's really emerging is a diversity statement. So a lot of schools in particular are requesting diversity statements as well. Typically in industry or government, they will ask you a prompt question if they're requesting that information either in the application process or at the interview. So we'll talk about interview questions in a minute. So from here, you've thought about your brand, you've sort of compiled what you want to have said about you or what you want to say about you. You've dumped all that into some of these documents here. Next step is actually to start looking for positions. So online, of course, is sort of the most common, especially today. Handshake in Illinois is our campus-wide recruiting system. So any position that we hear about across campus, whether it's an academic position, a postdoc, a fellowship, or something in industry, is going to go in that Handshake system. So that would be a great place. In addition, employers themselves will post in there if they're wanting to highlight to our students. I could do a whole nother workshop on Handshake, so that's where I'm going to stop, but that's a really important system to kind of get to know, even though it can be a little clunky at times. I would also encourage you to go directly to the source. So if you are looking at sort of a particular type of schools or type of employers, go directly to their websites. Many big companies will post lots of places because they can afford it. Small to mid-size employers can't. So they may only post on their own websites. So that's something that you want to keep in mind as well. Like go to the source because they're typically, it's free for them to post on their own websites. And so that's where they're going to post first. There are also a ton of targeted websites out there. Things like CNEN, Nature Jobs, AAAS, they all have their own careers page. If you're looking at more the academic things, Chronicle of Higher Ed, Academic Keys, Academic 360, chemjobs.net has sort of a conglomeration of everything. Those are all just some of the chemical sciences specific websites that are out there. Great places to look. Sometimes you have a lucky day, sometimes you see nothing, but those are all good sources. There are also generic websites, things like LinkedIn or Indeed, where our students have had a lot of luck. So you can try all of these when you're sort of putting your feelers out. My general recommendation, though, is spend more time on the things that are specific. So on an actual company website or on something that's more targeted to your field, like higher ed, or to particular type of employer, whatever the case might be, because those are going to be more fruitful generally since they are specifically and explicitly targeting you. It's also less to kind of just weed through. All right, so next step after sort of figuring out your brand, starting the documents, searching to even see what is out there, is networking. I think networking has a really bad rap to it, but really networking is just building relationships, hanging out with people, getting to know people. And some of us, that sounds great. For others of us, we're like, yeah, I'd rather work by myself. I'm not really a people person. That's fine. Start where it's sort of close to home, where it's easier. Talk to your faculty advisors, your collaborators, if you're working on a collaborative project. Talk to your lab mates. In some cases, they will be your competitors, of course, but in some cases, they may say, oh, I knew about this position. I'm not really interested in it, but you might be. Alumni from your lab are also really great resources, both because they might be more able to get you in at their organization if there's an opening, but also just because they can say, hey, this is what I tried. This is where I looked. These are some options that I've heard about. After that, even your family and friends. A lot of people say, oh, my family doesn't know anything about chemistry, so they're not going to be a good resource. You would never know. Sometimes it does work out that even somebody in a completely unrelated field might hear of somebody who knows of something that connects you to something. So even those resources that don't know anything about my field may still be good contacts for you. Another great resource, which is a little bit overwhelming at first, is LinkedIn. And again, I don't want to do a full on LinkedIn sort of workshop today, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that LinkedIn can provide. So using LinkedIn is important. First of all, sort of the step-by-step process, go into your search bar and search for the university, either your undergrad institution or U of I. And then from there, there's an alumni link that you can click on. So when you click on that alumni link, you're going to find tons of people, which can be really overwhelming. The reason I recommend starting with alumni is you've got something in common with them. And that means they may be maybe a little more willing to help you just because of that commonality that you have. So from there, you've clicked on the alumni, you've got this whole big page, filter by what they studied first, but you can also filter by other things like where they work. If you're trying to target a particular company, you can narrow it down by their geographic location. If you know you really want to be in California, whatever the case might be, you can actually filter by some of these other fields to get a little bit narrower. Now, the challenge with LinkedIn is you can't specify whether somebody was a chemistry undergrad or a chemistry PhD, like it's all lumped into the same pool. That being said, sometimes undergrads in the field can still be good resources for you. So once you've found somebody that you think, oh, they might be a good resource for me, click connect. But always, always, always include a specific message. So don't just send the generic, oh, I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn. Nobody wants that. Most people, if they don't know you, they're going to click ignore or just delete it. They're not even going to pay any attention. However, if you include a particular message with these two things, that will significantly raise your chances of actually getting viewed. So one of those things needs to be the relationship that you have with that person. You both graduated or you both attended the same institution. So whichever it is. So if you're reaching out to somebody from your undergrad, hey, I graduated from there too. Or if it's somebody who's an alum of Illinois, you can say, hey, I'm a current student trying to figure out what I want to do. The biggest thing is you want to include that relationship as well as why you're reaching out. A key here, though, is that you want to be sure to say you're trying to learn about whatever, their industry, their company. Do not say, I need you to help me get a job, because that's going to be a complete turnoff. Now, I guess I should say, if they know you, if they're a grad from last year and you've been close to that person in your lab, they might be willing to say, yeah, sure, of course, reach out to me, let me help you, no problem. But if it's somebody you don't know, start just by seeking advice. The key here is that everybody likes to talk about themselves. And most people really love to give advice to other people. It's kind of a human trait. So that's what you're tapping into, the fact that people want to talk. So asking for assistance, asking like, hey, I'm a current student. I'm trying to learn about what fields are out there. Of course, this is a lot easier if you're not about to graduate. But even if you are, it still is something you can certainly do. So for those of you who are younger, second, third, fourth year, great. Start this process now, because you truly are just trying to find out what's out there. You truly are just trying to learn, which makes it a lot less sort of hidden agenda. All right, so once you're connected, get out of LinkedIn and send them an email. usually you will see if you click on somebody's page and then their contact information, there will be an actual email address. Sometimes people haven't updated that super well. Sometimes they don't allow that to be visible even to connections, but for the most part, I would say like above 90%, you're gonna see somebody's actual email address. So get out of LinkedIn and send them a direct email. Ask a couple of questions, probably not more than 5. And think about like if somebody was trying to, if somebody else was asking you those questions, how long would it take you to respond? So don't make them have to do something that's going to take them half an hour, but something that they can quickly respond, like, you know, what do you like about your job? Or what's something you didn't realize before? Or what do you do on a typical day? What's the culture like? How collaborative is it? Any of those types of questions that they don't have to look anything up for you. They can just sort of give you their personal opinions. The reason that's important is because once they've responded to you, now they feel a little bit more invested. So then you can go for that big ask where you can actually say, gosh, it sounds like a great place to work. Do you know of any positions, or can you direct me to somebody who might know about this particular position I saw online? Whatever the case might be, you can move once they've sort of taken some time to respond to your questions to that larger, can you help me? Questions about that process? All right, so let me move on to the next step, which is a little bit similar to networking and using LinkedIn, but it's a little bit more in depth. And that's something called informational interviews. Informational interview is, again, tapping into that. People love to talk about themselves and love to give advice, but on a bigger scale. So you're talking maybe 15 to 20 minutes, phone call, Zoom, virtual, whatever, but it's an actual meeting that you would set up with somebody. Informational interviews are really great for helping to figure out what you want to do, because you're going to actually be able to have a lengthier conversation with somebody. They are also great for making contacts and building those relationships. Many, many times, even though the purpose of an informational interview is really just to learn about a field, many contacts have come back and said, you know what, why don't you send me your resume and I'll see if I can pass it around a little bit. But they sort of become your allies then in your job search process. As much as possible, though, you do want to keep that ulterior motive of I'm looking for a job more covert, at least at the beginning of setting up that informational interview. So again, you're just honestly trying to seek advice. Then you want to ask questions that can help you learn more about the role, that particular employer, maybe the field as a whole, if you're not really sure what it's like to be a consultant. You know, talking to somebody who is a consultant can help you with that. And then all of those types of things will then help shape whether or not it's a field you really want to pursue. Although one caveat about that, if you happen to run into somebody who's really down on their job, don't just take that one person's advice. Try to also find another person who can either back up that story or, you know, just counter it. But anyway, so learning about the field, about the company, about that specific role that they do. And then be sure to send a thank you note. It doesn't have to be a handwritten one, just something, you know, via email, but make sure that you're acknowledging the fact that they took 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes those conversations end up going even longer, but try to let them know that it's going to be 15, 20 minutes. And then as much as you can, stick to that. Great question. How do I actually set up an informational interview? Awesome question. So basically, you're going to go back to that person that you've already sort of established in a really rough network with. So it's somebody that you meet through a faculty member, or somebody that you meet and connect with through LinkedIn. I would just email and say, hey, you've been super helpful. If it's somebody you've already connected with on LinkedIn, would it be possible to set up a 15 or 20-minute phone call, Zoom meeting, whatever you're comfortable with, to learn even more about this organization or what you do as a consultant or whatever the case might be. So just ask, but be specific about that time frame. Again, that 15 to 20 minutes, a lot more people are willing to commit to something like that short. And then that's why you do want to keep your integrity and hold to that as much as you can. Now, if they say, hey, this has been great, I'd love to talk with you longer, by all means, but as much as you can, try to keep it to 15, 20 minutes, but just ask. And if it's somebody you don't have a pre-relationship with, but maybe your PI said, hey, you should reach out to this person, kind of the same thing. Drop your PI's name. Hey, so-and-so, professor, whatever, gave me your contact information and recommended that I reach out to you to learn more about whatever your field, your role. Could we set up a 15 to 20-minute Zoom meeting to do that? Again, some people will ignore you, but a lot of people like giving advice. They like molding future generations. So many people will be willing to give you that kind of a time commitment. All right, great question. And let's move on to number 6. So, of course, in the middle of a pandemic, this is much less fruitful. But even still, if there's virtual conferences, I would recommend that you attend them if you can at all. However, that being said, just attending a conference and hanging out with your friends and going home isn't going to be helpful for your job search. I mean, it's something else you can put on your resume, but it's really not going to produce any fruit for you. So before you even do that, ensure your LinkedIn account is up to date because you're going to need it to reach out to people and to connect. And then in some cases, sometimes it's right before the conference, but they will give out like an attendee list. If you get anything like that, by all means, reach out to people either through LinkedIn, or if you actually have an email address, send them a direct email to set up individual meetings, sort of meetups, etc. If you don't have an attendance list, you can usually get like, here's the conference program, here's the speakers. So you'll still know who's going to be participating in that conference to some extent. If there's somebody who's doing a presentation, yes, of course, I would recommend staying after the session and talking with the presenter, but a lot of people do that. There might be a line of 20 people and 10 people ahead of you. You're probably going to get about 30 seconds with the presenter. Whereas if you reach out before the conference, set up a time that works with their calendar, you're going to get a full 10, 15 minutes just for you. So coffee in the morning or coffee in the afternoon or hot chocolate if you don't drink coffee, whatever the case might be, or just a quick, can I just chat and meet with you for, 5, 10 minutes. Those are really, really helpful. In addition to that, introduce yourself. Now, this is really a push for those of us who are introverts, but when you're sitting in a session, try not to always sit by your lab mates or people that you know, and introduce yourself to people that are sitting around you, that are standing in the elevator, that are waiting in a line, even if it's just a, hey, I'm Patricia. I mean, you don't feel like you have to go into your whole elevator pitch. Most people feel the same way you do. So if you don't like pushing yourself, like I do a lot of etiquette events, I know as some of you know, and I will ask in those rooms typically, like, how many of you would love to walk into a room of 400 strangers? And I might have 50 to 100 students in there and like 2 of them will raise their hand. Probably the same thing here if I pose the question. Most of you are probably going to be like, I can do it, but I don't like love it. Everybody feels that way. So if you take the initiative, most of the time they're going to be relieved. Now they have somebody to talk to or say hi to, or even if it's just a quick little exchanging of small talk, you still have that connection now that can help you take the next step. I would also recommend having business cards. So there's 3 ways actually you can get business cards. You can have them printed through the university, and you have either, as grad students, you have either the option of doing like a staff business card, or you can actually have a student business card. The downside with the student business card is it's got in huge letters student written across. The plus side though is you can actually put a lot more information on it. So you can add a LinkedIn profile or something like that, whereas a staff card typically doesn't allow you to put any social media or anything like that on it. You can still put your email address, but that's the limit. The third way is actually just to make them yourself. So a lot of people feel like they have to have the cute little logo. You don't need a logo. Just have your name, have it be bigger, and then put whatever information, contact information you want underneath it. You can print those off on your own computer if you buy the paper from Walmart or Amazon or whatever, Office Depot, or you can actually use sites. There's a bunch of them online where you can actually just input all your information and like within 7 to 10 days, get a box of business cards for 25 bucks. So in those cases, you can put whatever you want on them, then you can use them as much as you want, and you can have those to pass out at conferences, which is really helpful. Now, of course, that doesn't apply to virtual conferences, but certainly for those once we get to go back to in person. Of course, I have to put a plug for career services in here as well. So another thing that you can do to be successful in your job search is to participate in our events. And we have a ton of them. So career fairs, we do a bunch of workshops. We have employer information sessions, which typically do happen in the summer and then the fall semesters for PhDs. A lot of people ask, like, well, this sounds like it's, I'm about ready to interview with them, or I'm about ready to find a job with them, so I have to wait to go to these until I'm further along. And that's actually not the case at all. So information sessions are something you can go to from your very first year here on campus. In fact, we encourage you to do that, because then it's a good way to sort of learn a little bit more about what options are out there, if there's a particular company you might be interested in, or you go to a couple of the hardcore research sessions and you're like, yeah, I definitely don't want to do that. That all can be really helpful. In addition, even though this isn't officially sanctioned through Career Services Office, but there are a ton of really great professional development workshops. So all of our student organizations offer things that aren't necessarily billed as career seminars and workshops, but that's really what they are. You can go hear alums, learn a little bit about what they do as their job, which can then help you decide, oh, that sounds interesting, or no, I definitely don't want to be a writer when I leave here, whatever the case might be. So all of those are really good things to kind of keep in mind. The other thing is seminars. So a lot of our seminars are led by faculty members from other institutions. So if you are interested in the faculty track, you absolutely want to be going to those. I know you have to go to a certain number every year, but go to all of them that you can if that's your track. Every once in a while, though, we'll bring in like somebody from a pharma company or different types of industries, because they have named lectures that somebody's paid for, typically from that company. So those are really good to attend to, just to even hear about the research that's being done. But it also gives you a contact that you can then reach out to later on with questions, even if they're the CEO of the company. So all of those things are great to go to, not just when you're about ready to graduate, but even earlier on. Career fairs are probably the one exception that typically you want to wait and go to those when you're actually seeking something. So that might mean, hey, I'm seeking an internship, generally once you've passed prelim, but not all the time. I mean, sometimes people do them earlier. Or if you're actually seeking a full-time job, then the career fairs are the right fit. But otherwise, most of our career events that we offer are open to everybody. All right. The other thing that you need to do, number 8, is you need to practice your interviewing skills. And this is helpful no matter what. The more comfortable you get with the interviewing process, actually the easier it is to network and the easier it is to connect with people at conferences. So don't wait until, again, you're ready to graduate, but try your hand at interviewing. By show of hands, either physically or like with your little reaction, how many of you have ever done a formal interview for something? Okay, a couple hands. Oh, good, more than I thought I would see. All right, well, a lot of times that's not the case. So you guys are probably just all really up on it and professional, so that's great. For those of you who haven't, that's okay. I would recommend that the first interview, the first professional interview you have, isn't for something that you really want. So come practice with our office. We actually have a mock interview program that basically runs you through whatever kind of interview you have coming up. So if there's a particular, once in a while, we'll see fellowships that require a pre-interview, even something like that. We can work with you on your interview skills. Or I know there are a couple of major like financial cash awards on campus that also have an interview, like the, my goodness, I'm blanking on the words, but like an innovation prize where you can get a chunk of cash. There's an interview associated with that. So interview with us before you go interview with those. We also have a program that the university subscribes to called Big Interview. And this is the website, it's just illinois.biginterview.com. And you can go in there, it's all computerized, so it's not super exciting, but you can practice your interviewing skills and it'll even give you some feedback. So if you're not looking at the camera, or if you use a bunch of filler words, things like that, it will give you some feedback on that. So that's another resource. And then Career Services has these interview survival kits. They're really great resources. They're very generic, so they're not specific to your research. I would hope, though, that you can talk about your research with ease, because that's what you've been doing for the past number of years. These are more of those behavioral type questions. So tell me about a team that you've worked on, or give me an example of a conflict. So it's kind of like flashcards that you maybe used in elementary school. But the nice thing is on the back of these, they give you some tips and tricks for how you successfully answer those questions. So these are free here in our office. You do physically have to come get them, but you can stop by anytime we're open, which is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and get a pack of these to hang on to. All right, so I want to talk just about common interview topics. So if you think about stories that you have that would be relevant for all these topics, you can kind of be a little flexible because you might not get exactly asked, tell me about yourself. It might be, give me your research talk, or give me an abbreviated version of your research, but it's still sort of the same thing. Tell me about yourself, tell me about your research in relation to this position is always sort of the underlying comment there. Strengths, weaknesses, they might also ask, tell me about a time that you succeeded at something, or give me an example of a failure that you had. So that's sort of big, is another sort of big bucket topic there. Working with people is huge. So tell me about a team you've served on, or give me an example of a time that you led a team or had to motivate somebody. Tell me about a diverse work environment that you were in or a part of, or tell me about an example of when you didn't all see eye to eye. But any of that sort of big working with people. Along those same lines is something more directed and drilled down about communication skills, which a lot of times comes out in the way of, give me an example of a conflict you had with somebody. They're not necessarily looking for a time you actually had a fight with somebody, but a difference of opinion, a general conflict. That's important because when I'm hiring you, if I were an employer, I want you to speak your mind. But I also want you to do so in a way that we're all still going to be able to work together professionally. So if you are a bear that comes charging in, or a bull that comes charging in, pushing your way around, my way or the highway, that's not going to be very effective in most companies. On the flip side, if you never share your ideas, if conflict comes up at all, you sort of become that doormat or that wallflower. I don't want that either. I'm hiring you for your brilliance, for your ideas. So you need to be able to share those in a positive way. Another big sort of bucket area is innovation, troubleshooting. A time that you created something new that only you did, which of course as PhDs, you should be doing this, even if it's just a lab procedure, or you set something up safety-wise, whatever the case might be, something unique to you. They will probably also ask you about your organization skills, maybe comes in the way of like deadlines that you've had to meet. Unfortunately, in grad school, unless you're trying to push something out for a specific, conference, or it's time for my ORP, you usually don't have a ton of deadlines. So they want to know that you can fit within deadlines. And then finally, they want to know why them. So what about that company makes you interested in them? What about what they do makes you interested in them? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'm going to break you back into groups. So everybody kind of look through this, pick a question that you want to ask of people in your group. I'm just going to have you kind of go around and answer a question. And if you say, I hate that question, give me a different one. Everybody has to be okay with that in your group. So just kind of practice interviewing each other really briefly, and then we will kind of wrap up the last number 9 and number 10. All right, so let's jump back into our breakout rooms. All right, so moving on to the next section, what kind of is another piece of all of this. That's how you look. And I don't necessarily care about some of the specifics, and it really does depend on what type of an employer you're going to, but there are some general things that you want to keep in mind anytime you're interacting professionally. So business casual is a huge thing that a lot of grad students ask me about. So business casual attire is what you should wear anytime you interact with any employer. And that also includes like, oh, I'm flying to, New Mexico to interview at such and such in college, how you dress on the plane. So all of that should be business casual. And basically what that means is wear a nice shirt or a top and nice pants or a skirt. It's pretty much that basic. Generally, that means no exercise gear, tank tops, t-shirts. A t-shirt like I have on today, which is just a plain little t-shirt, would be fine. But anything that's sort of printed generally is not something you want to wear when it's business casual. Jeans typically are not part of business casual, but it kind of varies. If you're going to a startup, Silicon Valley, probably jeans are going to be more appropriate. But even in those cases, I would say make sure that they're a darker wash, make sure that they don't have holes in them, that they, the bottom, the cuffs aren't getting all raggedy, that kind of thing. And hats or headpieces, unless they are religious, should not be worn anytime that you're wearing business casual, interacting with an employer. So again, even if they're saying, hey, we're gonna, I don't know, I've never heard of this happening, but we're gonna have this, higher ed sometimes will do stuff like this. We're gonna have a potluck and it's gonna be at so-and-so's house. Even in those cases, you still wanna wear more of a business casual. So no hats, no jeans, that kind of thing. Shoes wise, you can wear flip-flops if they look nice. So the rubber or plastic, don't wear those. But other types of flip-flops would probably be okay. Tennis shoes, generally not. And then accessory wise, generally I would say no. So this one even is kind of borderline. I wore it just specifically so y'all could see. It's really loud, literally, when I move. So it's gonna be distracting. It also can be, it looks kind of really bright. So depending on the employer, this might be a little bit much even. So nothing that's sort of showy or over the top. And that can also include nail color, hair color. Again, keep in mind your audience. So if you're going to a Silicon Valley startup, they're going to be a little more flexible than, a McKinsey or something that's going to be a big, more business world consulting type company. When you are interviewing, I would recommend still wearing a suit. And for on-site things, try to have closed-toe shoes, probably flat shoes, unless you really are great at walking in high heels. But if you know you're going to be walking, doing a lab tour, doing a plant tour, anything like that, make sure you've got good walking shoes that are also appropriate with your suit. And then finally, have the right pieces with you. A nice briefcase or a nice bag, a leather portfolio or a fake leather portfolio, a nice pen. The biggest thing, this is fine. Like you don't have to have a $200 cross pen or something like that brand. The biggest thing is you don't want a pen that has somebody else's logo on it. So if you're going to interview at, BMS, you don't want to have a Gilead pen, obviously. So just something that's kind of nice looking. And then your presentation is another big piece of this. And I put this at the end because I'm hoping that by the time you're ready to do interviews, you've done this. That being said, you are going to need to still have a few different versions. When I say presentation, I mean explicitly your research talk. You will need a short version. So 10 to 15 minutes. This is generally going to be used in one-on-one settings and should be picture heavy. You also, if you're going to actually be in an in-person interview, you need to bring in paper. Paper is easier because you can slide it across the table and they can see it right in front of them. Whereas when you're trying to use an iPad or a laptop, the screen might not be right. You kind of also have to sit at an angle. It's just not comfortable. So paper versions are always better, but short. Again, we're talking 10 to 15 minutes. You will also need to have your full talk ready to go. And generally that's going to be either a 30-minute or a 60-minute, depending on the employer. More often it's going to be a 60-minute. If you are doing a site visit, whether it's in person or virtual, you will absolutely, if you're applying for a research position, you will absolutely have to have your research talk ready to go. One key that I would say is always stand when you're giving your research talk. So it's weirder when you're doing it virtually, but if you have to prop up a whole bunch of books to set your laptop on top of it so that you can stand up, do so. We talk differently when we stand. And so if you're presenting your research instead of just sort of talking about it, you want to present it. And it's always going to be easier to do that if you're standing up. Another thing that should go without saying, but I still have to say it because I've seen it, proofread everything. If you have any kind of errors in your slides, an employer is going to notice, and not in a good way. So read through it, but also have somebody else read through it. And not just somebody who knows your research, but maybe somebody from a different lab who's going to have to read more critically when they read through your slides. Make sure that there are no errors. And then expect the unexpected. When you are doing your research talk, something is going to go wrong at some point. You know, the technology isn't going to work, the whole computer shuts down, whatever the case. So be ready sort of with all those different scenarios. So maybe have it on a disk, be able to email it to yourself before you leave. Bring in paper slides that can be quickly photocopied of your full talk, whatever you need to do to be able to expect the unexpected. And then when you're doing that 60-minute talk, generally you want to have some time at the end for employers to ask questions, but roughly no more than 5 to 7 minutes. So really you want the bulk of your talk to be you talking. All right, so those are the 10 steps from putting yourself together and figuring out your brand all the way through being able to present your research talk well. Things, as long as you're doing all of these pieces, that will help you be much more successful on the job search. There were a couple of questions that came in on the Slido that I want to be able to address. And if you didn't see the link early on, here it is again. If you would like to ask questions anonymously, you can certainly do that. So the main questions that popped up were, one was about timing of the whole job search process. It kind of depends on the type of employment that you're applying to. Generally though, if you're looking at industry positions, you're looking at a full summer before you graduate. So if you're thinking you're going to finish around October or so, like 2 summers basically before. So it is pretty early, and that just starts for like the big companies. If you're looking at small or startup companies, kind of different, because in those cases, they're generally wanting people who are ready to start. So usually in those cases, no more than about 6 months before you're ready to graduate. And that usually you'll want to start applying. With small organizations, like I said earlier, that a lot of times they're not putting their positions on these big sites like Indeed and so forth. They just can't afford it. So if you're thinking that that's what you want to do, you want to pursue the sort of startup environment, for example, definitely be going to those organizations' websites directly. Government, some will say, depending on the position, it can take 12 to 18 months from the time you first start the application process. Usually there are a lot of background checks and sort of a long process. So again, it kind of depends there. Certain consulting companies also go pretty early. So a lot of deadlines come down in the summer for the bigger consulting companies. Again, just like with startups, smaller companies tend to be a little bit later. Academia, it kind of depends. So if you are a postdoc, you could really get recruited just about any time. So sometimes they'll start you in January, sometimes they'll start you typically in, a summer type start so that you're ready to go for the fall. But the process sort of depends on the institutions that you're applying to. I would say roughly, probably late summer through early fall is when you really want to be hitting it hard. If on the other hand, you're not looking at like an R1 institution, but maybe more of a PUI or even a staff position somewhere, then that's probably even going to be later in the school year. So that would be more like a late fall semester, early spring semester when you're going to see those positions. So the dates are kind of all over the board. It really depends on what you're actually looking for. So feel free to come in or send me an email and we can talk more specifically about your specific situation. Here's my email address. The other question is, how is the job market for grads right now? So again, it probably depends a little bit on the field that you're wanting to pursue. Unfortunately, we've had sort of a glut in academic positions the last several years. So it is a little bit more tight, but Even that being said, we've got postdocs who are getting positions at R1 institutions every year. We've got grad students who are getting jobs at PUIs every year. So there's still definitely an option out there. Last year, for those of you who are interested more of the oil and energy fields, was a tough year with the pandemic. And there, I would say again, positions were a little tighter, but they seem to be really opening up right now for grad students. Pharma, of course, is still hot. Anytime you're in the middle of a pandemic, that's going to be the case. And then other types of industries have been holding pretty steady. So a lot of our, specialty chemical companies, semiconductor companies, et cetera, as well as those who are working in, again, what I would consider, some would consider the non-traditional fields of consulting or other types of organizations. So pretty good overall for most of the types of positions that we have out there. All right, so it looks like I've got one other question that's come in. Yes, you can get the slides. And then, another one that just posted up. How can we keep a long-time network once connected with people? Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much for that question. The best way is to sort of periodically stay in touch. So what happens so often is you think, oh, I don't need this network. So you just sort of let it go. And then all of a sudden you need it. So I would say for those people that might be most relevant to a potential new job down the road, hop in with them every 6 months. Send a quick little, hey, how's it going? Message if you're connected on LinkedIn. The other thing that you can do is stay active on LinkedIn. So maybe if you publish a new, publish a new article, put it out there on LinkedIn. Or if something else big happens, put it out there on LinkedIn. Stay active on social media, because then even if you're not officially connected to those people, they feel like they're connected to you because they see things coming through their feed. But yeah, if it's somebody that you were close to once and you sort of let that connection slip or that network slip, all of us have done that. It's better just to reconnect when you need it than just to say, oh, well, I've let that go, so I have no hope. So if you can, every 6 months, every year, sort of just shoot them a quick email. Obviously, the more you go along in your professional career, the bigger your network's going to get. And if you've got 2,000 people you're connected to on LinkedIn, you're just not going to be able to do that. But if somebody posts something, comment on it. Like, hey, I got a new job, comment on it. Yes, that takes some time. And so you do have to sort of allot some, an hour or so, maybe, I don't know, whatever you feel like you have, an hour a week or an hour a month, and periodically kind of go through and comment on things or pay attention to things. And that's a fine way. If you don't actually have time to send a message every 6 months to a year, at least if you're commenting, you're staying connected. So great question. Anybody else, other questions? You feel free to unmute yourselves too if you'd like to do that as well. All right. Well, that being said, thank you